we're going to have a panel session now, and a bit of discussion. So Doug is...
Two more beards.
Two more beards. There we go. Maybe we should get them in ascending order or something. I don't know. Can we shuffle across? So Doug is head of UK client group at Vanguard, and Tom leads Accenture's wealth management efforts in the UK and Ireland. And we're going to have a bit of discussion around this theme of tipping point. What have we seen in market to date? And then what do we expect to see in the future? So I might ask each of you gents to give us a couple of minutes, maybe a point of view from both of you, and then we'll move into a bit of a discussion. So maybe, Doug, if you could kick us off with a bit of a story about the market's growth for Vanguard in the UK and where you saw that tipping point. I'm conscious you joined the business recently, so it'd be interesting to get your maybe outside-in look at how the Vanguard story is.
Yeah, that's right. And just to be clear, my boss, who'd worked at Vanguard for 20 years and was a big part of the story, decided she was ill today and sent me onto the platform. And here I sit with a beard selling passive funds, which came up on Reed C. And having spent 15 years at an active manager, so I wonder whether I'm at the top of the tipping point on the way down. But maybe, who knows, I'll be here in a crop top next year and we'll still be doing well. I think I was an outsider watching the growth of Vanguard in the UK, but spent a long time considering whether to join Vanguard and have been working in the business for 3 months, getting to know a lot of senior people, a lot of people who've been part of the story. And I think there's a couple of things that, as a step back, are really important when you think about Vanguard as an entity. You think back to Jack Bogle, think back to 1974. Vanguard's going to be 50 years old next week. The US market, a very, very different way where people are accessing investments, saying, falling out with everyone at Wellington, saying you need to buy the haystack, not find the needle in the haystack, saying I'm going to start a company where the clients are going to own it. And then being a belligerent sod and just going on and on and on and on about it until suddenly kind of things really kicked off in the States. That is quite hard work. That is kind of fascinating foresight and kind of that belief in what is going to be good for the customer and what's the best way, not only to give them access to investments, but also to structure a company to make sure that built into its culture is this sense of looking after the customer and helping them get their fees done, I think was incredible foresight. And coming into Vanguard, what is fascinating is that sense of kind of mission, this concept of build great quality kind of components and products and solutions for the client and deliver them at really good value. It just persists throughout the company, but also do that with a real focus. And I think that's a really important point, is this focus point. The amount of things that Vanguard has said no to in terms of chasing fads, product channels to go after, ways of getting distribution, from the very start. Vanguard has never paid commission to get access to, to distribution. It's always wanted to try and sidestep that because it's seen it as something that, isn't good for the end customer. All these things are pretty, were not done in the industry at the start. And it's kind of fascinating to see how that continues to pervade throughout the organization. And then the second thing is this corporate structure that I mentioned. I've only ever worked at one company before this for 15 years, and I've never worked for essentially a mutual organization. And what's absolutely fascinating is the way that, if you take away the kind of equity holder, the person who's the shareholder in the stock market, private equity or whatever it may be, and you say you've got clients and the clients own you, and you've got your people, the way that embeds into your culture where you're always obviously looking, a company can't work without the kind of lifeblood of profit and revenue. But the way when you get to a profit and you're generating revenue, that the conversation turns to, well, we better put our fees down then, or, well, what's the next thing we can do where we can really help clients? It is unbelievable how that kind of can create an organization that is really driven. And those are the two things noticed coming into Vanguard. Now, in the UK, many of you would have experienced this. Vanguard came into the UK in a big way. It had been there kind of lightly before in 2012. And I don't think at that point in time, post RDR, anyone said, I tell you what, the best thing you should buy is a multi-asset fund of funds that's 22 basis points. I think it might have been a bit more then actually, but but no one was asking for that. This market was all about, Dave, you always tell the story really well. It was about advisors and platforms giving people access to products that they could pick. It wasn't about kind of, let's put solutions together and allow the financial advisor to focus on the business of financial planning, coaching their clients and advice. It was about giving access to investment products, and indexing wasn't a thing at all. 10% of the market was indexing. It was all about the active managers, the star manager and so on. And coming in 2012 with a very small team, what was interesting was that focus that I talked about, is that when you talk to the people who built that business, they said, financial advisors focus on helping financial advisors with the business advice, teach them that investment is simple, it needs to be efficient, it needs to be low cost, and just keep going. And it took a long time. In investment markets, you need to prove performance. So launching a range of things, you need to demonstrate the performance angle is there. And then things help you along the way. As performance goes your way, there was a huge tailwind around the way that rates and inflation went. The point kept being proven. But during that period, the persistence to stick to the message, to really believe in what you're doing was right, is the thing that kind of really helped Vanguard in the UK. And now you fast forward kind of decade or so later, £40 billion worth of assets sit in the life strategy range. Indexing is 30% of the market. There's still an awful long way to go. And the competition in terms of investment has certainly come the way of Vanguard. It's a bit like Dave's party there. The Vanguard crew may have been on their own there, but kind of everyone is kind of coming in to join that party, and advisors and wealth managers across the board are focusing on advice, financial planning, coaching, and so on and so forth, rather than trying to sell investment as the thing that they can be good at.
Right. Thanks, Dov. Tom, you're coming at this from probably the other side in your client conversations, in looking at the future and looking at what's going to happen over the next 10 years or so. What are the kind of themes that you're seeing emerging, and how do you see that evolving in the market?
I think if we think about clients and advisors, first of all, we don't think the fundamental needs of clients will change, or the fundamental set of jobs to be done by advisors will change. But what we see a lot of change in is the expectations of those customers from the firms who provide them the services, and the possibilities for how the jobs to be done get done changing. So talk about client expectations and client centricity. The clients of today and tomorrow have their expectations more and more informed by not just FS providers and FS products, but the whole ecosystem of companies and experiences that they interact with. And they increasingly expect kind of fulfillment and service delivery to be on a par. When they're satisfied, they're measuring themselves against an Amazon or a Netflix, not against a retail bank or an FS provider. So they no longer have the expectation that just because I'm doing financial planning or getting advice, it deserves to be slow, and it takes time. We also, I guess, if you're looking 10 years in the future, you'd expect to see where private wealth is held in the UK to be in a radically different set of hands. So more and more of private wealth will be owned by women. Wealth will have transferred to partners and to children. And their expectations and reasons for investing are probably quite different to the expectations and reasons for investing of the people who are holding the money now. So we think the challenge for firms is, how are you going to stay relevant to that set of clients, and what are the set of capabilities that you need to have that let you stay relevant? And to the theme of today, we think an agile technology stack, the ability to leverage analytics and insight on your customers and keep pace with their changing expectations and what they want, is going to be absolutely paramount. So we would expect to see the winners to be those with really flexible technology, rather than the kind of Gen 1 monolithic kind of technology that we see today.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So I guess we've got changing consumer expectations set by the market that moves around them. We've got apps and things that are doing that for us. We've probably got a world where it's really easy and engaging to pick a film that lasts 2 hours, and a real pain to pick a pension that lasts 40 years. And that feels like maybe a bad combination. So we know we need to change it, and kind of outlined there how we get there. The skeptics might say that it's too hard to change, that actually kind of systems, industry infrastructure, all of those things present too many barriers to make this viable in terms of building what you might want, which is a flexible proposition that's client-centric. Certainly seems to be the direction the FCA wants us to go in. Consumer Duty is a great sort of signpost towards that. What would you both say? I'm happy for whoever to pick this up first, but like, to those skeptics who say, actually, this feels frankly too hard, or this bit of the industry isn't able to go on that kind of journey.
Me to take it. So like Ruth, actually, I came into this sector of financial services from retail banking, and I did about 8 years there, and I've done 5 years in the wealth space. And you don't have to look too far to see examples of that skepticism being challenged in our industry. So fears of replatforming, for example. I think Accenture, in my time at the firm, has migrated over a third of the UK's mortgages onto different technology platforms. That's a super complex product to migrate, a hard thing to implement, but it's perfectly possible. And most of those implementations have been done in the dead of night over weekends, locked away in business parks around the UK. So it's definitely possible. I think the unit economics will be what drives the change in the inertia and stops it. And it's just whether you want to be on the right side of that or trying to play catch up, basically.
I think it depends on what we're talking about. I mean, I think we're seeing many of you either give advice or work with advisors. I think, it's a really interesting period right now because of a number of factors. Some of it is, and predominantly is, consumer duty. Some of it's the cost of insurance. Some of it is just the cost of doing business. But, we're actually seeing the wealth management community and the advice community kind of coalesce around high net worth clients and kind of not really actually they probably do want to deal with smaller clients, but actually from a commercial perspective, they're finding it harder and harder to deal with the smaller clients. And a lot of that is to do with the risk of doing it and this feeling that, that premiums might go up, they might be caught out, consumer duty makes it too difficult. There's loads of demand in terms of people with bigger tickets that they can make more money out of. The advice process takes too long and so on. So I think from a consumer perspective, when people want advice, I think they're quite keen to get it. It's actually, can the advice sector actually deliver it, particularly as you start getting into the kind of smaller clients. The smaller clients now, when you talk to advisors, we're talking sometimes about advisors turning away people with £200,000 of plus of investable assets. And so I think where technology comes in is like, can it help with some of these things that make people not want to give advice? Can it help with, delivering simple solutions where there's less of a risk? Can it help with the fact find? Can it help with the proposals? Can it help with annual reviews? Are there ways you can use, you can do these things in a simpler way, more efficient way, where you don't worry about the risk that the regulator might come after you on? And I think that when we talk about the advice market is kind of what is going on at the moment. We talk about the theme of today is, gradually then suddenly. Pieces of regulation, I think, can be really, can really kind of move things quickly, and they can do it in really great ways. Consumer duty at its heart is trying to do great things. But on the other hand, if it kind of makes advisors more reluctant to give advice to smaller clients, that leaves a gap, and we've got to work out how to solve that. And I think that's where simple, efficient, tech-enabled things could help advisors in the future. I don't know what the answers to that are, but certainly I think this concept of delivering simple investment solutions with more efficient or simple ways of doing it using technology is quite interesting as well. So I think that's it. I mean, so often we focus on direct to consumers, and there must be ways of getting loads of consumers access to things. But a lot of consumers, they're happy having their money in cash. They need it. They're happy in accumulating via D2C platforms and so on. At a moment in time, they want advice, or it's when they inherit things that they want advice and so on. And at that moment, we as an industry, are we going towards that, or are we shrinking away from it? I guess what Ruth and Octopus are trying to do is an attempt at that. And there's lots of interesting people doing lots of innovative things in this space. That's kind of how I see these things developing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. We've probably got a number of people in this room who are building some kind of advice solution or technology solution around it. I guess interesting, maybe Tom, to come to you first from a sort of a board advisory position. But if I'm going to running a big financial services business and I'm thinking, okay, how do I even think about starting a technology strategy on this thing? So probably a whole mash of other stuff that exists already, and I'm trying to build that flexible future. How do I start to go about that? What things am I looking for in the kind of partners I work with and people I work with?
Well, Dave said customer obsessed in his opening remarks. So I think before we were in at a tech strategy, we'd be saying, what's your customer strategy and what's your business case behind the proposition? But then I suppose you've got all kinds of different archetypes in play for the tech that you create. Lots of the FTSE 100 type companies that we work with are pursuing customers in that mass affluent segment. And like you were saying, Doug, don't necessarily need full advice or don't need it at the point of acquisition, but might want to access it later on down the line. So they're looking at strategies around how can we get lifetime value from the customer, but be with the customer for when they're starting their investing journey, or maybe saving and then investing, through to when they're in full wealth management and financial advice. So again, what they need is strategy and a technology stack that can serve those different needs of the customer over lifetime. And then in terms of like what would their tech strat look like, that's just going to depend on their starting point. Well, I suppose some of the major archetypes we see would be spin up a new greenfield platform, test it with a small base, try and scale that, through to, hollow out what I've got, move digital journeys onto the new tech, make my back-end system simpler and simpler, and then just leverage the power of the microservices layer and APIs to plug in and plug out the different things that I believe back to the customers are going to make me relevant and win the right opportunity to manage their money.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, that whole kind of lifetime value of the customer, because certainly if we're in a world where some advisors won't touch a client unless they've got £200,000, it feels like that's an easy way to solve the lifetime value of the customer, which is just to go very, very high net worth. I mean, how do you, as a kind of provider in the space, start to think about balancing out that acquiring maybe a lower value client today to grow a portfolio business that's successful? I don't know, Doug, if you could talk to that slightly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an awful lot. I mean, if you look at kind of what we do, we basically serve people building components, which is indexes and indexing and active funds through ETFs and mutual funds, and then we provide solutions via multi-asset, and we also do some customized model portfolio arrangements as well with advisors. I think on multi-asset wrap funds that are simple, that map well on a risk rating basis, that aren't dropping the ball, that aren't taking lots of asset allocation risk, they suit the small clients really well. And I think we've already kind of been successful because, for the higher end clients, you're seeing the rise of MPS, which gives people what feels like a customized solution, gives them a portfolio that the advisor says is their portfolio. With multi-asset, kind of, you can deal with that. And I think from a product provider perspective, kind of, those kind of solutions work really well. It doesn't really necessarily solve the problem I talked about earlier, which is giving advice on things. One of the things that's really interesting, and I know there's a couple of people who measure this in the room, is if you look at platform data, direct-to-consumer platforms are growing, advice platforms are pretty flat, wealth platforms are growing a little bit. It's quite interesting to see that kind of coming through, despite the fact that, there's competition from cash, annuities, all sorts of things going on in terms of component provision. And, obviously we have our own investor platform that's been growing. I think our brand has been resonating and so on. So that's part of the solution, but it doesn't help when these events happen, right? Like these things, like we've got the budget coming up, I'm sure the advisors in the room are getting lots of phone calls. So are direct-to-consumer platforms, there's something in the middle that needs to emerge, right? So to answer your question, the simple investment proposition works. I think the direct-to-consumer, the emergence of direct-to-consumer platforms doing different things in different ways and different services is great, but there's somewhere in the middle where kind of we need solutions to emerge, essentially. And product providers like us, that's hard to solve, but there's loads of innovation that could be done, I think.
Nice, thank you. And Tom, you mentioned a minute ago about kind of having an API strategy that you build into as being a part of a lot of conversations, at least at boardrooms. What does that mean in terms of the in-house tech capability that financial services businesses need to make the most of that? And how do people get their heads around what transformation that might mean for them as a business in order to be able to build this platform?
I think one of the bits of coaching that we frequently play back to boards and technology teams is to do the holistic design. So having people who understand the customer needs, the regulation, digital technology, human delivered journeys, technology and the APIs and the data sort of all around the table inputting to the design, rather than the business specifying some technology, handing it over to the tech team to develop, not being too happy when what comes back, or the tech team building something or the data team building a product, trying to get the business interested in it and then wondering why it doesn't commercialize. So I think the main point there is making sure that it's not an API strategy that is in a vacuum. But I suppose the whole point of it and the value at the heart of it is to, on the one hand, control your costs, and on the other hand, to be, back to my point, flexible to the customers who are ultimately driving the performance of your business.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I guess next question, if I'm an incumbent and I'm looking at this future, this flexible future that's going to be built on technology, should I be seeing this as a sort of a threat or an opportunity? And I'm not going to let you say a bit of both. So maybe I'll come to you first, Tom, and then over to you, Doug. But which of those does it represent most for incumbents in this space?
100% opportunity. Same way as in retail banking and the reinvention that we heard about from Ruth, I think. So, the businesses that are, what we've been talking about is money is in motion. Okay, it's moving into DC pensions. It's moving more into passive funds. It's moving to different types of consumer. And so you need to stay relevant to where that money's headed. You need flexibility to be able to stay relevant. That's your opportunity. And then if you believe that the story from retail banking is going to sort of play out here, then that's what we're seeing happening. That's where new account openings are going. That's what's happening to legacy tech stacks. They're being upgraded to, Mambu and Thought Machine and things like that as we speak. In retail banking, they've finally bitten the bullet after years of kicking the can down the road about it's too hard to get off our, COBOL architected platforms. And I think the same will happen in the wealth space, whether it's D2C platforms or, through to businesses serving high net worth, ultra high net worth. Just a matter of time.
So, I think for existing businesses, what we're talking about is a threat, because I think if you're in a consumer duty world and with a changing dynamic and expectations around technology, if what you're delivering is, I'll sell you an investment portfolio, and the investment portfolios are starting to look more similar because that is the simplest and most effective way to get investment, and you're delivering that with quite an old-fashioned approach in terms of your client engagement, the way you report and so on, one of these suddenly, gradually moments happens, right? And it could be anything, but suddenly there's someone else who's doing this better, simpler, in a way that a client understands. And I think, when you look at our industry, the way it is coalescing around higher net worth clients, being very focused on the personality and the relationship, but actually trying to sometimes still lead on investment and give kind of what is an increasingly undifferentiated approach. The differentiators are going to become service, technology, all this kind of stuff, and the people element, which is what a lot of people are buying you for. So I think there is, you've really got to think about this stuff because, here's a good example, right? How much money has gone into cash recently, which used to go into platforms, right? Like when that money comes back, is it going to be going to the same people who used to get it or not? That's a big question for us as an index provider. We think a lot more is going to come into indexing, but from an advisor perspective, when it comes back, where's it going to go? So, it's that kind of thing. That could be one of these suddenly, gradually suddenly moments, that we talk about in 5-10 years time.
Amazing. Thank you both very much. I think that's been really illuminating and appreciate you for your time. So thank you. Round of applause for our guests. Thank you.